You didn't just meet a narcissist. You met the breaking point that finally woke up every part of you that forgot its own power. That connection wasn't accidental. You didn't just end up with a narcissist by chance. You were placed in that experience. And today, I'm going to reveal exactly why. I get how that sounds. You might be asking, why me? Why did I face that pain, the manipulation, that emotional fog? But what if I told you there's a powerful purpose? One so profound it will completely change how you see that entire chapter of your life. Most focus on the narcissist, their lies, their games. But this isn't about them. This is about you. You were placed in that fire for the same reason you're rising now, stronger, louder, and unshakable. So hang on, because what I'm about to say might just flip your whole perspective. There's a moment you may have missed, one that shifts everything. It's when you begin slowly forgetting who you really are. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. You begin prioritizing others too often. You dim your own light to avoid conflict. You stop listening to your intuition. You start doubting your feelings, needs, and value. You convince yourself it's okay, that you're just being nice, that it's love. But it's not. What's really happening is a subtle erosion of self. Maybe it's past conditioning, early wounds, or a society that teaches you to be liked instead of being true. That good means quiet. That small is safe. And that's when they appear. The narcissist sees you before you see them. Not because you're weak, but because you're open, generous, willing to carry more than your load. That's exactly the kind of energy that attracts someone who thrives on control. They don't look for people they can crush. They look for those who haven't discovered their power yet, because those people don't fight back. Not at first. They rationalize the chaos, excuse the gaslighting, twist themselves to be enough. They hand over their voice, their instincts, and their power because somewhere along the way, they learned love had to be earned. Narcissists feed on that. They didn't pick you randomly. They picked you because you were ready for the lesson. That lesson was simple: come home to yourself. The narcissist wasn't there to love you. They were there to reflect back every wound still bleeding inside you. That fear of being left. That belief that you're only valuable when needed. That discomfort with boundaries. They saw those things. And whether they knew it or not, they used them. Not because you deserved it, but because there's a version of you on the other side who no longer accepts scraps. That version is fierce. That version speaks up. Doesn't over-explain, doesn't shrink, and doesn't trade peace for approval. But you couldn't become that version without seeing how far you'd wandered. The narcissist wasn't a punishment. They were an alarm bell. And yes, it sounds extreme, especially when the wounds are fresh, but stay with me. The moment you started handing over your power, the universe sent a mirror to show you what that would cost. It hurt. Deeply. But that pain wasn't random. It was a flare, a signal, a disruption. You didn't end up here because you're broken. You ended up here because you love deeply, give generously. But that beautiful capacity becomes harmful when it's not paired with self-worth. And that's what this experience came to reveal. When you finally reclaim your strength, everything shifts. You stop chasing validation. You stop tolerating emotional contortion. You stop performing. Instead, you start attracting people who see and match your worth. You set new standards. You take back every part of yourself you once handed away for love. And that shift doesn't just transform your relationships. It reshapes your whole life. We avoid talking about wounds. We ignore them, mask them with success, people-pleasing perfection. We stay busy. We smile and say we're okay. But beneath that, there's a quiet ache, a fear that we're not enough. And that's exactly where the narcissist found you. They didn't cause the wound. Let's be clear. That pain was already there. Maybe it came from parents who withheld love unless you performed. Maybe from years of being dismissed, told you were too emotional. Maybe from trauma, neglect, or being the one who always held it together. Wherever it came from, it left a void, craving for love, safety, validation. Narcissists sense that void. They don't heal it. They exploit it. They study it. Feed it just enough to keep you hooked. They echo your dreams, say all the right things. It feels like they finally see you. But it's not nourishment. It's bait. And once the mask drops, confusion sets in. You blame yourself. You think if you just love more, give more, stay quiet, things will return to how they were. But that cycle isn't about love. It's about power. and they use your pain to gain it. But here's the twist. They exposed your wound, and that exposure is the first step to healing. You can't fix what you pretend isn't there. That relationship forced you to face the parts you were avoiding, the parts that didn't believe you deserved more. And yes, it's brutal, but necessary. The wound that let them in is the same one that leads you out. That's the heart of growth. That's the birthplace of change. You begin asking better questions. You stop trying to fix them and begin repairing yourself. You build boundaries, not as walls, but as protection for the healed version of you. You remember that your worth was never up for debate, that love doesn't require suffering. And healing, it's not always pretty. It's messy. It's crying in your car, letting people go. It's uncomfortable, but it's also liberation, real, soul-deep freedom. Because once you face the wound, you stop bleeding for people who never deserved your sacrifice. You rewrite your story. That narcissist didn't define you. What defines you is how you rise. Each time you choose yourself, set a boundary, stop apologizing, you reclaim your power. Some are born into nurturing love, others into survival. If you crossed paths with a narcissist, odds are dysfunction felt familiar. You called it normal. You called it love. So when they showed up, you didn't see red flags, you saw home. That's why you stayed too long. That's why you rationalized the wrongs. That's why you ignored your intuition. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system confused chaos for connection. But your soul knew. And eventually, it screamed louder than your programming. Because you didn't come here to repeat. You came here to break. The narcissist didn't show up to punish you, but to catalyze change, to reveal what's still running in survival mode. And in doing so, they gave you a choice: repeat or rise. You were chosen to end the cycle, not because it's fair, but because you can. You were placed in that fire to see clearly what ends with you. The gaslighting, the fear, the shame, that stops now. For you, for those after you. Because when you heal, you don't just heal yourself. You change the lineage. It's painful work. It's grieving what you never got. Rebuilding from pieces. Saying no to what you once said yes to. Watching people fall away when you rise. Sitting with loneliness as you rebuild from scratch. But in that rebuilding, you meet your real self. The one who doesn't chase, who doesn't excuse red flags. Breaking cycles isn't about anger. It's about awakening. About knowing you never had to beg for love in the first place. Just because someone wants you doesn't mean they're good for you. Love without respect, empathy, or effort isn't love. It's control. And when you finally break free, you start seeing the world differently. You hear yourself more clearly. You trust yourself more deeply. Your intuition sharpens. Your standards elevate. Your peace becomes non-negotiable. You stop seeing chaos as thrilling. It becomes exhausting. And the moment you no longer choose pain dressed up as love, everything changes. Narcissists don't arrive quietly. They arrive like a storm. Calm, then chaos. Love, then discard. It disorients you. But that chaos, it's a signal, not just of who they are, but of what still lives inside you unhealed. The chaos was a mirror, a wake up. Because when life whispers and you don't listen, it starts to scream. Not to hurt, but to redirect. To shake loose everything unaligned. The part that settled. The part that lost its voice. The part that believed being needed was love. Outwardly, you looked fine. But deep inside, there was a disconnect from your truth. Then they entered. They didn't just arrive. They crashed into your life with lessons, with pressure, with emotional whiplash that asked, will you keep abandoning yourself or come home? That's what the chaos was for, to wake the silenced parts of you, to question the idea that love means pain, to challenge the belief that quiet means peace. Every time your gut screamed, that was the real you. You tried to fix it. Fix them. Fix yourself. But what needed fixing was the belief that your worth was negotiable. You weren't weak. You were adapting. You shrank for peace. But that peace was fake. And your body knew it. The anxiety, the overthinking, the dread. Signs your nervous system couldn't keep surviving this. And sometimes we need a collapse to wake us up, to show us where we've dimmed our light. And here's the raw truth. If the narcissist had been just good enough, you would have stayed. You would have kept betraying yourself. But the chaos made self-deception impossible. It peeled away the layers and said, no more. Waking up isn't instant. It's a crumble. And that crumble makes space for a new foundation. One built not on fear, but on truth. The storm didn't destroy you. It exposed your strength. Pain feels like punishment, but what if it's direction? What if the heartbreak was redirection? The jobs, the relationships, the patterns, they become comfortable cages. And the universe, when gentle nudges don't work, flips the table. That's what the pain was. Not a punishment. A pivot. You weren't targeted because you're broken. You were placed in the fire so what's hidden could be revealed. The narcissist revealed your shadow, the overgiving, the silence, the fear of being too much. It surfaced because it needed healing. You wouldn't have left if it didn't hurt. That's the unspoken truth. But the pain made the illusion impossible to maintain. This isn't just about leaving a toxic partner. It's about waking up your whole life. The pain didn't come to ruin you. It came to free you, to end the myth that love is earned, that perfection is worth, that silence is virtue. Pain gave you something you didn't have before, clarity. That raw clarity led to rebuilding from truth, not trauma. That pain wasn't your ending. It was your invitation. And even if you didn't feel strong, you're here. You're listening. That means you've already said yes to healing. There's always a moment in an argument, in the silence, in tears. A whisper says, "This isn't it." That voice is truth, not the trained version, not the survivor version, the real you. You're not here to be an emotional caretaker. You're not here to play small. You're here to break the chain, to stop the cycle, to say, no more. You were born for this. Yes, it's hard, but you've got the strength. You were placed in this space not to lose, but to discover who you really are. And that discovery, that's how everything shifts. Healing begins not at the breakthrough, but in the breakdown. When you stop pretending, when you say, enough, you stop waiting, stop hoping they change. You start reclaiming yourself, and in that reclamation, you rise. You stop begging to be loved and start remembering love isn't something you earn, it's something you are. And from there, you change the game. Your peace becomes sacred. Your voice returns. You no longer apologize for existing. And those who thrived on your silence, they feel it. But you don't owe them comfort. You owe yourself freedom. You were never broken. You were conditioned. But now, you remember, you rise, and you rewrite love for everyone who comes after you. The narcissist wasn't the lesson. You were. That may sound strange at first. After all, it was their behavior, their manipulation, their cruelty that caused the damage. But the deeper truth is, they were only the trigger. The real story is what they activated in you. The unhealed wounds, the unconscious patterns, the survival mechanisms you didn't even know you were still living inside of. You see, narcissists don't choose people who are weak. They choose people who are disconnected from their power. People who are generous to a fault, empathetic, loyal. People who will carry the weight of the relationship on their backs and call it love. And that's where your part of the story begins. You didn't just stumble into that connection. You were drawn in on some deep energetic level because there was still a part of you that believed love was something to earn. That if you could be good enough, patient enough, loving enough, you could finally feel safe, valued, chosen. Maybe that belief came from childhood, where love had conditions. Maybe it came from past relationships, where your needs were always too much or your voice too loud. Wherever it came from, it created a vulnerability that made the narcissist's mask feel like a dream. At first, they mirrored everything you'd been craving: attention, affection, admiration. It felt like being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. But what you didn't realize was that this was a setup. The narcissist wasn't showing you who they really were. They were showing you what you wanted to believe about yourself. And that's the hook. You weren't just chasing them. You were chasing a reflection of the version of you always wanted to be: loved, understood, finally enough. But when the mask slipped, when the charm turned into coldness, blame, control, you didn't run. You stayed. Not because you enjoyed the pain, but because the deeper part of you believed you had to fix it to be worthy of love. And that's what this experience came to show you. Not just that they were toxic, but that somewhere, deep down, you didn't believe you deserved more. This isn't about blaming yourself. This is about understanding how powerful your conditioning was. You were trained by your upbringing, by society, by generational trauma, to disconnect from your own needs, to override your instincts, to be nice at the expense of being honest. And when the narcissist came in, they didn't create your wounds. They simply found them. They pushed on them. exploited them, used them to keep you second guessing your reality. But in doing so, they also exposed them. Because no matter how hard you tried to be enough, to keep the peace, to make it work, it never got better. The harder you loved, the more it hurt. And that contradiction, that impossible bind, is what finally snapped something awake inside you. You were the lesson. You were meant to realize how far you drifted from your truth, how much of your worth you'd placed in someone else's hands, how long you'd been settling for breadcrumbs while calling it love. And when the pain became too loud to ignore, when your soul started screaming louder than your fear, you were forced to confront the real issue. It wasn't just about them. It was about you. About how little you'd been asking for. About how easily you'd abandoned yourself just to be chosen. The narcissist revealed it, but it was already there. This experience didn't come to show you their darkness. It came to show you your light and how long it had been buried under people, pleasing, under survival mode, under the need to be accepted. You were placed in that fire not to burn, but to shed everything that was never yours to carry. The version of you who stayed, who bent, who silenced herself. That version isn't your truth. It's your training. And the only way to break it was to see it, to feel the cost of it in real time. The narcissist was never the main character in your story. They were the trigger. You were always the transformation. This was never about fixing them. It was always about remembering you. Because once you see it, once you wake up to how much power you handed away, you can't unsee it. You start reclaiming it, bit by bit, and that's when everything starts to change. Not just in relationships, but in how you see yourself. You stop performing. You stop begging. You stop shrinking. You start choosing. And not because of what anyone else sees in you, but because you finally remember who you are. The lesson wasn't in their abuse. It was in your awakening. Pain often masquerades as punishment. We're taught to believe that if we're hurting, we must have done something wrong. That heartbreak, betrayal, and confusion are signs of failure or weakness. But what if that's not true? What if pain isn't personal? It's directional. What if every breakdown wasn't meant to shame you, but to redirect you towards something deeper, something truer, something that was always yours, but buried beneath years of survival? When we look at pain through that lens, everything shifts. It becomes less of a wound and more of a compass. Pain is the language of the soul when we've ignored every whisper, every nudge, every sign that we've outgrown something. It shows up when we've stayed too long in places that are too small for who we're becoming. That job you dread going to, the relationship that chips away at your confidence, the patterns that keep pulling you into chaos, those aren't just coincidences. They're signals. And the longer we ignore them, the louder they become. Until one day, the pain is no longer just discomfort. It's devastation. It tears through the false peace you've created. And in that collapse, you're forced to see the truth. This isn't working. Not because you're broken, but because you're being called to rise. In narcissistic relationships, this truth becomes even more evident. These dynamics don't start with fire. They start with fantasy. At first, it feels like everything you've ever wanted. Someone finally sees you, understands you, mirrors your dreams. But eventually, the cracks begin to show. The charm turns to cruelty. The admiration turns to criticism. You start questioning yourself more than you question them. And before you know it, you're trapped in a cycle of trying to earn back the version of them you met in the beginning. That cycle is the very definition of emotional confusion. But the pain it creates is not just about them. It's about the silent agreements you've made within yourself. The belief that love is supposed to hurt, that you should be grateful for crumbs, that loyalty means tolerating mistreatment. Pain breaks those agreements. It shines a light so harsh and so honest that you can't look away anymore. You see the relationship for what it is, but more importantly, you see yourself for who you've become in it. Maybe you've become quiet, hesitant, anxious. Maybe you've been walking on eggshells, bending your truth, sacrificing your peace just to keep things okay. The pain calls that out. It disrupts the delusion. It forces you to stop performing and start confronting. That confrontation is the turning point, because it reveals that the hurt isn't just about what was done to you. It's about what you've been tolerating, what you've been afraid to face. When you begin to understand pain as redirection, you stop trying to escape it and start listening to it. You start asking, What is this trying to show me? Instead of numbing it, you lean in. And what you often find is that the pain isn't pointing to your weakness. It's pointing to your power, the parts of you that are buried under years of conditioning, the boundaries you were never taught to set, the voice you were told was too much, the needs you were shamed for having. Pain doesn't just expose those things. It demands that you reclaim them. That's why the pain hurts so deeply, because it's not just breaking your heart, it's breaking the false self you've built to survive. And survival is never the same as thriving. Pain tells you when it's time to stop surviving and start living in truth. It tells you when your spirit is suffocating, when your life no longer reflects your values, when the people around you are benefiting from your silence, and it won't let up until you make the change. Not because life wants you to suffer, but because it knows you're capable of more. Redirection doesn't always look like clarity. It looks like chaos. Like losing what you thought you couldn't live without, like feeling lost and raw and uncertain. But in that unraveling, something else begins, a deeper knowing, a quiet strength, the realization that maybe the loss wasn't a loss at all. Maybe it was a return to self, to power, to alignment. Pain is the process of that return. It's not the end of your story. It's the place where your real story begins. And when you stop resisting it, when you meet it with presence and honesty, it no longer controls you. It transforms you. You were chosen to break the cycle. That's not a metaphor. It's a truth that hits deep when you really understand it. Because the patterns you've been living, the ones that brought you into a relationship with a narcissist, didn't start with you. They were handed down, silently passed along through generations, embedded in your upbringing, disguised as normal. Maybe it was a parent who withheld love unless you performed. Maybe it was emotional neglect, being praised for being easy, quiet, low maintenance. Maybe it was being taught to keep the peace, to smile even when you were hurting, to be grateful for whatever love was offered, even if it hurt. That kind of conditioning runs deep, and without even realizing it, you inherited a blueprint of love that confused sacrifice with connection, silence with safety, and endurance with strength. So when a narcissist came into your life, something in that dynamic felt familiar. Not healthy, but familiar. Their hot and cold attention, their unpredictability, their need to be in control. All of it touched an old wound that already existed inside you. You didn't consciously choose pain, but your nervous system, trained to see dysfunction as home, didn't see a red flag. It saw a pattern it already knew how to survive. That's how deep this cycle goes. It's not just emotional. It's biological. It's ancestral. And breaking it isn't just about leaving a toxic relationship. It's about waking up to everything you've been trained to tolerate. The role you played in that relationship, the giver, the fixer, the peacekeeper, wasn't born there. It was built long before. And the narcissist didn't create those tendencies in you. They exploited them. They benefited from your loyalty, your empathy, your willingness to give the benefit of the doubt. And for a while, you may have called that love. But eventually, something cracked. The exhaustion, the anxiety, the constant questioning of yourself. It became too loud to ignore. And in that moment, you started to see it. The cycle. Not just with them, but in your whole life. The ways you made yourself small, the way you bent to be acceptable, lovable, enough. That was the breakthrough. That moment of recognition when you stopped blaming yourself for their behavior and started asking, why have I been okay with this? That question is where the cycle begins to break. Because the truth is, not everyone gets to that place. Many people stay in the loop forever, confusing chaos for connection, mistaking control for care. But you didn't. You started asking harder questions. You started seeing the cost of being the one who always holds it together. And in doing so, you stepped into the role that only a few are strong enough to take on, the cycle breaker. The one who chooses discomfort now so that future generations can know peace. The one who chooses boundaries over approval, truth over silence, healing over performance. Being chosen for this work doesn't feel like a gift at first. It feels like grief, like loneliness, like walking away from people you thought would always be in your life. It feels like guilt for saying no, shame for needing space, fear that you're doing something wrong because you're finally choosing yourself. But those feelings aren't signs you're failing. They're signs you're shedding. Shedding the old roles, the old patterns, the survival habits that kept you small. And in that shedding, something new begins to grow, an identity that's not rooted in pain, not shaped by someone else's approval. It's rooted in self-respect, in truth, in clarity about what love is and what it's not. Breaking the cycle means being the first to say, "This stops with me." It means choosing to heal wounds you didn't create. It means grieving the love you didn't get while also refusing to chase it in people who can't give it. It means holding yourself to a new standard and refusing to go back to who you were just to make others comfortable. That's not easy work. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. But it comes with peace, real peace. The kind you don't have to beg for, the kind you don't have to lose yourself to keep, the kind you create when you finally choose to honor your worth, not prove it. And when you do that, something bigger happens. You don't just heal yourself. You start a ripple. You show others what's possible. You teach by example that love doesn't have to hurt. That being needed isn't the same as being loved. And that worth isn't something you earn. It's something you remember.